Welcome, everyone, to Skills Connect. This is a series where we have conversations with the world's bold and responsible changemakers. We're super excited to have Sandra here. Sandra is, and I love the title because it's so unique in market. She is a chief learning scientist, and we're going to ask her in detail what a chief learning scientist actually does. She works for EPAM. She leads the company's educational initiatives, translates the EPAM skills based organization models directly to clients, and oversees the global community education program that essentially bridges the gap between school and work. Her innovative work has also been featured in Forbes, TD Magazine, CEO Magazine, and she's just recently been recognized as a global leader in consulting. And I feel like your ultimate hype girl with this intro. So welcome to the show, Sandra. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. We should do some mutual I love what you do. So we should just talk about that for a while.
I love it. I love it. So before we get into any questions, what the hell does a chief learning scientist actually do? What are the tasks? What are the skills? What are proficiencies?
So as far as I know, I'm the only one in the world, so I can just tell you what I do. But I think the most important thing is that before coming to EPAM, before joining this corporate world, I was a learning scientist, which means that my whole background is the psychology of getting people to do hard things. Real learning is hard. Training and learning are not the same thing. And so my whole career has been around motivation and cognition and figuring out what skills people have and how to measure those and know when they've changed. And so the title, I don't know if there's anybody else that has it, but that's what I do. And it's amazing to be able to do that at a company like EPAM.
Yeah. And I think the bridge between sort of the customer, the internal, that's actually quite unique to also bring learnings to the customer, through what your practice and what EPAM actually does. I think that's really special.
Yeah, it's super cool. And it's like a unique position because I'm both internally facing and externally facing, some more than others in different years. But it's yeah, EPAM's learn stuff and we want to help our clients learn those things too. And so yeah, it's a revolving door.
Yeah, I think some of the best learning that we have brought to customers has been failures internally. So don't do this or do this because if you do this, you're going to save all of this time doing this. So I think it's actually a really important part of the strategy. And I do think you're going to see, especially now, the whole reskilling learning market is about to be flipped, I think. Just the whole approach to how we've traditionally built learning strategies, how we have thought about reskilling, given the era of AI and this completely transformational once in a generation change to work. I think we're going to have to kind of go back to day zero and start rethinking how we do learning. So the scientist approach actually feels pretty relevant, given there's a lot of chief learning officer roles that are sort of moving down into sort of leveling within enterprises. They're moving under talent development. I think there's this opportunity for that sort of approach in learning to really be thought through in a different way. So I love it. I love it. So our relationship started, so it would have been over 2.5 years ago when Reejig started. We started seeing all of these problems with the skills-based approach, right? And I've been very public about this. I think it's another one of those examples of share the learning. And we felt that customers had, massive gaps in terms of the context of the work that they were doing, which meant we couldn't inform the skills. And typically how vendors do their matching is we look at skills on people and we look at skills on jobs and we do this matchmaking process. So we had went down the road of actually thinking that that wasn't the final approach, and we built out what we called the work ontology, which is where we broke down work into tasks, subtasks, skill requirements, and triangulation of that. Then I met you and I was like, oh my God, there's an actual person in real life who has actually done this in a real company and had validated that. For us, that was a thesis of we're going to do this, this is real in our view. But you know what it's like when you're building a product, a lot of it is a thesis and a vision of what you believe will actually solve the problem. And then we met you and you were actually doing it. So I have so many questions, and I'm sure everyone else has so many questions about that whole journey. First, I think, a lot of what I talk about is day zero. What would you do if you were starting again, given everything given EPAM, how did they go to work and tasks? Like, what was the brain sort of thinking process, about that in the first place? To me, it sounds pretty common sense now, but actually, if you asked me 3 years ago, I probably would have went, hold on a second. So I would love to kind of start really basic on that, to kind of bring folks on the journey of how you thought about that, how the team thought about it.
So it started 30 years ago and I was 15, so I cannot take credit for like pretty much any of this. But basically, so EPAM, professional services company, no one knows EPAM. I'm just gonna like do a little background because it's really important. Our entire business model revolves around selling skills, basically. Like we have to match people to our clients' projects. And the nature of our work is that we are like super high-end digital platform engineering. So we build these like amazing platforms that like, any of the tech vendors that you see out there, we've probably built a big piece of that. So our people are software engineers, AI experts, and data experts. That's the vast majority of the company. And so this is important because this whole thing started because you had these engineers and data people who needed to match people to work, and they wanted to do it in the most data-driven and effective manner. And it was coming from the business. There was no HR at EPAM for like the first like I don't know, 20 years or something. This was a business initiative. And they've realized very early on that there are two sides to the coin. You can't just match people to skills because you don't know what skills the client needs. So you have to start by figuring out, well, what is the work to be done? And then you can say, okay, what are the skills to do that work? And then, okay, now who has those skills? So that journey for us started 30 years ago, and it was a staffing issue. And I think that's why, like, it didn't, again, not from HR. This was a business problem trying to solve like a staffing issue. And I think that's why we realized early on, you have to have both sides. You can't just talk about skills because skills only get you so far.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think like my previous career before Reejig was working in a large global professional services company, large global engineering company called WSP. And we basically, people were our product, and projects and the movement of folks to work was kind of what I looked after. But it's really interesting that, when we met, then it was like we had started with our customers retrospecting them out of just the skills ontology into the work ontology. So we were like just coming out of that phase, just about to break into the US. And then meeting you was really interesting because when you think about your world, like, can you kind of simplify it to a level where it's like, where does the work sit? How does it bring it into your world? How does the matchmaking, like, can you give a little bit of context into that? Because that's something that you've built yourself, right?
Yes. Oh, EPAM's built everything themselves, the entire, I mean, everything. So structurally, we're set up very differently than other organizations. Like I said, we didn't have HR for like 20 years. So the business and a bunch of software engineers who wanted to build all their own processes, like built our company. So it's just designed differently. So the way that we work, we have practices that are kind of like groups of experts, like centers of excellence kind of thing. And they're the ones who generally are going to get tagged with the client project. Like, so it's going to be like a cloud project or a data project. And this is like, it gets cross-functional, but early on, it was much more simple. And so they're the ones who are closest to the work. They know what the client's asking. And so they were the ones and they still are responsible for like breaking down the work into tasks. And then like kind of like everybody figured out like kind of what are the skills required to do those, like initially it was just by like gut.
Mm-hmm.
And then the much hardest part, or harder, the harder part, is figuring out who has those skills. And you would think that HR is deeply involved in any part of that process, but at EPAM they're not. It's because it's all been designed and it's automated and it's like AI'd, and so it's a technology solution that the people organization supports like significantly, but it's not owned by them. And so I guess that's how we're structured. It's very business led on purpose because the business understands the work. The business understands their workers and their skills, and they're the ones who are best positioned to figure out how to match them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it makes so much sense when you say it like that, right? So it's funny how we all ended up where we ended up to now be in this position, right? And I think one of the other things that you and I keep getting pulled into on social media, especially, is this debate about skills versus tasks. What's your take? Because I've got a pretty hot take on it. So, but I would love to know your opinion.
Uh, it's you can't have one without the other. I don't understand the idea that you would either just do tasks. Like
Yeah.
you'll get somewhere if you just do tasks. There's no question. There's a lot of value in just the pure task intelligence. And you'll get somewhere if you just do skills, but you won't get where to the promised land, so to speak, unless you do both. Right. And so to me, there are two sides of the coin. Now, I say skills because it's like a lingo shorthand term, and I want to kind of change it. I want to say like workforce 2.0. Like workforce 2.0 to me encompasses skills, people, tasks, work, and AI agents, also part of the workforce. And so like I'm gonna start saying it now because I'm tired of talking about skills, not because they aren't important, but because they're not the whole picture, and we need to stop
Mhm.
pretending that they are.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree. I think we called and we sort of, trademarked the work ontology because we believed that it was more than just skills and it was more than just tasks, even in the context of work, right? And the skill versus task, like I keep saying over and over and over again, like people have skills. So that is true. They have skills, but work has tasks. And you need skills to complete those tasks. And then AI automates the task, not the skill, right? So I think like it's the simple toolkit for how to think about, when you're rethinking your own workforce, is to think about it in that context, because we shouldn't be creating enemies out of one thing or another. Like the folks that started on their skills-based journey have put a lot of effort into that journey. There's been a lot of, really smart people that have been part of this whole journey. And this is an evolution of that journey. This is not, they got it wrong, that's terrible. It's actually like, hey, but what we've all found is that as the workforce has evolved, and especially when you come to agents, that it's a completely different makeup and a completely different workforce DNA. So it is an evolution. And we kind of landed on it because we were feeling in terms of like the matching algorithms wouldn't be great, and the inference of a skill is not great if you don't actually have the context of the work. And no one had work context. Like we were getting job adverts, job descriptions, and it's terrible data. Even pulling random data out of HCMs is not super good data. Like it actually is very, very noisy. So that was why we really focused on, well, hold on, let's figure this thing out and build an ontology of work for every single industry so that we have this sort of depth and breadth of understanding. So, I mean, I completely agree with you on that. What is really interesting is, though, that it's becoming the new hype. So there is definitely a little echo chamber that's happening around tasks, and folks that you wouldn't think would be deploying tasks into their products are now experimenting into certain products, which I find really interesting. So I think we're going to have to be careful that this doesn't become another skills-based hype cycle. Like I think like we don't want it to be all marketing and not delivery, because that's really where a lot of customers, since coming into the US market myself, a lot of customers, and you probably feel this yourself when you go and talk to your customers, they're needing your advice on how do they get this thing off the ground outside of just a pilot or outside of a proof of concept. Talk me through that. Like what have you seen, really works with customers in terms of they've either started their journey and it's not really going places, because I've heard a lot of that in the skills market. Like, what's your take? Because I know I'm getting my perspective from where I'm sitting, but would love to know what you think.
I'm going to be a little bit spicy and say like we have, when we talk to people and we actually do work. So a lot of what I do is just like explain what we do just to help people get an art of the possible, like sense of like, what does it mean to function in this type of organization, like future focused. But if we're going to do real advisory for clients, we will not do it if the only key stakeholder is the people organization. Like we
Yep.
won't, because
Yep.
it will not go far enough. It cannot
Yep.
go far enough because, again, of the need to understand and have data around skills and work, or people and work. And so we require that, you have to have your CIO or your CTO or the technology person on board, because this is a data problem. It is a technology architecture, enterprise architecture problem. And we prefer it if you have your COO or your CEO on board too. This is not an HR problem. This is a business problem.
Mhm.
Right now, the business, and there's not a lot of measures of this, but there is so much inefficiency in human capital. You have the wrong people in the jobs. You have people in jobs who are underperforming or not optimized because they're just not the ideal person. They're not motivated about their work. You have terrible hiring practices where you're hiring people, firing the same type of people on the other side, and there's no data around. There's just so much going on, and that was before AI. But
Mhm.
AI now is changing the game, and it will require that companies start to get very serious about understanding their people and their work in a granular way, because they're going to have to, as you said, like allocate work between humans and agents. And if you don't know the work, you can't do that. And
Yeah.
so I guess the most important thing for me in talking with people about how to move forward, whether you've started or not, is that if you're just going it alone on the HR side, like you're just not going to get very far. And
Yeah.
because of the fact that this to solve this problem, you don't just procure a technology here or there.
No.
The massive data infrastructure issue. And if you don't solve it, you won't get the insights, you won't drive the change, and you won't realize business value at scale.
Yep, completely agree. I think the other thing as well, like, especially when it comes to the AI strategy in terms of like defining where to bring AI in, like where is even worth implementing it, and then the implementation strategy. If you don't understand the work, basically you're just throwing muck at a wall and hoping something sticks. And then you're going to have this issue where you have then an employee adoption issue, and then you have all of these different things that are going to happen, and it all leads to the whole transformation and the potential of AI really not happening the way that it could, right? Which is would be such a waste of potential. And I think the more we're seeing in customers, like some of our customers, like they're big and global all over the world, and they're starting to become this theme of like, I think some of the HR leaders are now starting to think about this AI approach, right? It's been 2 years. We've had warnings about this, and now they're starting to go, okay, we need to do this. But what's already happened is the business stood up an AI strategy team or a little hub or a task force, or they've hired a chief AI officer, and that ship has already it's leaving, right? It's already pretty much started, and now what they're doing is trying to retrospectively figure out how to get involved. So I think like for anyone on the call, like it's really critical that you hunt down and find the AI strategy team or transformation team, wherever that hub. Because I think I seen a post on social that you did the other day about how it's this like in between ops, AI, strategy, transformation, all kind of looped in. Like, tell us a little bit more about how where you think it sits, because I'm seeing HR here, AI strategy team here, which isn't even deeply in the IT team in most organizations that I've seen. It's like a little like tier out from that team. What are you seeing in your world?
So we do a lot of AI strategy and actual AI development and deployment work for clients. Like that's what EPAM like primarily does, like that kind of thing. So what we're seeing is exactly the same thing from the other side, right? Every day I am called in to talk to some client who, and I have to say, like, what are you doing? Like, let's assume that you've got this perfect thing that you want us to build. Awesome. Now what? What's going to happen? How are you going to get people? If you're going to replace jobs, are you going to fire everybody? Like, how are you going to handle this? And so, and there's an awareness like ish in the back of their head. But I see like the AI leaders, which at least in my world are largely in the technology organization, not exclusively, but largely, like teenagers driving like a new souped up like sports car while texting, right? Like they're just like going, and they have this cool new toy and they're trying to figure out like how fast it goes and how to corner and like all that stuff. And they're just going, and they kind of know that there are other people on the road. They know that workforce is going to be implicated, but they're not thinking about it because they also don't know how to think about it. And they're very scared of people. Like they don't understand people. And like, so they're just going to worry about that later. But on the HR side, on the people side, we're talking about skills. We're now talking about work, but we're not talking about that to these like teenagers with their
Mm,
souped up hot rod. And, I think HR talks a lot about not having a seat at the table. But businesses are very basic. If you explain to the business that they are going to save money or, be more agile or have less risk, or, be better in terms of their product or service, they will listen. They won't bring you to the table just because you're there and around. They'll bring you to the table because you're going to help the business. And I just desperately wish HR would understand that and not, I mean, every company is different, but in general, understand the business, the language of the business, understand the data issues, the technology issues, like the back end components of what it means to be a skills-based organization, and think about their AI or their skills strategy not as a list of technologies that they have procured, but as a mechanism to drive business value.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you're saying the things that a lot of people just wouldn't say out loud. You know what I mean? Like when you say that, no, it's good, because it's like, I think that conversation about being at the table has been around since I've, been a grown up in work. And I think I do agree that, you have to think like a business person. And I think that role of HR is going to absolutely completely change. Like I'm already seeing like, more sort of traditional HR models or leaders now being sort of early retirements or finishing up or, moving into special projects. And then they're now bringing in new sort of commercially led HR folks. And I think that really comes down to what you're saying. Like, what is the business actually focused on? The amount of HR folks I talk to that don't even know how much earnings they make. Like I've created a little GPT prompt for anyone who wants it. If you want to figure out like what earnings are and what matters, I download the reports on a regular basis to just understand. But I think like understanding the business problem is critical. At the end of the day, the CEO and the board now are drastically pushing operational efficiency, AI adoption. Velocity is like the hottest word. Most companies that we're working with, talking to, they're not talking about bringing in AI to cut jobs. They're talking about to speed up the work because productivity has completely slowed right down. And everything is about how do I remove workforce bloat? How do I think about where is the best place and most cost-effective areas to think about AI adoption so that the net outcome will be a better customer service to our customers, to speed up delivery, to build more products, to win in market. Like they're typically the reasons that customers work with us. Now, there is a thing that will happen if the maturity of the technology goes to the place that you and I both believe it will, which is transformational. I'm not talking the stuff that everyone's playing with now, which is like automating a task with AI, which is what we're all talking about. I'm talking now about true autonomous agents that will take over an end-to-end process. That will change work. That will fundamentally impact our workforces in a completely different way. When this is where the learning strategy needs to be best friends with the AI strategy, because it's not going to happen in 2025. 2025, I believe, is going to be a really messy year. It's going to be a bit all over the show. Everyone's just going to try and figure out, and they're testing and they're iterating and they're piloting. But I think by the time we get to 2026, the technology, one, will be mature enough, and the businesses will have had that kind of, the pre part before you go out on stage, like to kind of like get all your jitters out and figure out all your messes. I think 26 will end up being a lot more actual deployment of true AI. And I think
so. Let me add something to that, because I think you're 100% right. I think the timeline will. I'm debating whether it's going to be 1, 2, or 3 years, because here's the thing, I have a front row seat to the bleeding edge of this autonomous worker, like the agent plus human workforce, right? This is all happening right now in software development because they're the ones who build the freaking AI, right? And they're the ones who know that, what AI can best do. So the challenge, it's the AI innovation cycle, is that it's not just about taking existing processes and using AI to do pieces of them, because that actually doesn't help anything. what is happening right now in software is that they have to rethink the entire process. Like the whole thing has to get reframed in people's minds. And then, you have to teach people how to work with agents. You have to have those agents already. Like there's a whole massive change management thing. But you can't do as a business, you can't really understand how to help people develop these different skills until you understand how the work has changed. And so I think that what you'll see is, people will get a better sense of that, and then, it'll move into new industries. The other challenge, though, is that right now, you have companies who are going to be AI native. They're building them and deploying them right now, where they're built around agents. And the human capital is only coming in to do the work that the AI cannot do.
Yep.
And they're picking exactly the right people and having only the right number of them. And so you're going to have entrants into the market, completely new logos coming in and being half the cost of the same good or service, or maybe even a better good or service. And the customer base would be stupid, and they are not, to ignore that. So you're going to have these disruptive companies who are going to come in and put massive pressure on all the companies that we know today to get, exactly as you said, faster and leaner and better. And it's going to be a little bit of turmoil, just like in the era of Amazon and Google and all these digital natives. You have AI natives, and that's going to be kind of a mess.
Yeah, by the way, the part that you're saying about the companies and the smaller, leaner AI natives, that's literally what we're building. So for at Reejig, I look at my competitors and I know revenue and I know models, and they've got 3 times the size of my business. But because we made that call 2 years ago to completely build from day zero up, our goal is to build $1 billion company with under 100 people.
Yeah.
And look at the people that I'm getting to hire right now, because we're reallocating capital into really awesome people that can bring magic. Look at the Nunos of the world and the Jacintas of the world. A typical startup wouldn't be able to bring folks like them in, right? So, and that's down to the way we've designed our workforce strategy, is exactly what you said, is that AI native environment with then this superhuman touch around high value expertise. And I completely agree. And it's going to be really interesting to see bigger companies that are traditional, behemoth companies that no one would ever expect, now suddenly start getting chipped away at, because there's going to be all of these kind of fast, lean organizations that have been built that are just going to outdo them. Their marketing is cheaper, their cost is cheaper, their productivity is higher. There's just all of these reasons why I think this is why every board is now putting pressure on the CEO to say, hurry up. Why are we not doing that? And I think that's where you're feeling across businesses all of this tension, which is happening around do more with less. Everyone figure out and deploy AI, which, we have seen a couple of customers where we've talked to them and we're like, oh, what's your approach to thinking about deploying AI? And it's because they've met a vendor who's pitched a really good pitch with a use case that they thought was really exciting. And I'm like, oh God, this is not going to go so well. It's not going to go. So in terms of, this new workforce DNA, so if we bring it back to, the workforce DNA that's going to be required in this new business. So this kind of native to AI organization, you'll have, your permanent employees, you'll have your flex workers who will roll in and out, like consultants, even from EPAM coming in as expertise model. And then you have your digital workers. Talk me through how you think organizations who are on this really traditional job and person in a job model should start to think about this. If you're the chief people officer and this is now sitting with you, what would you do? What are some of the things that you would start to think about when you're thinking about that approach?
Number one, most important thing is to start thinking about the workforce as humans plus AI. You can't put it in a box. It's going to be there. You need to understand it, because you need to have, you need to get yourself into the table where you're talking about how that's going to be allocated. Here's the thing, right? AI agents, once you have them, let's say they were, perfect today. They're going to keep changing. And that means they're going to be taking more and more tasks, different tasks, new things are going to be created. This is going to be just from now on, it's going to be a dynamic thing. Jobs will change. Job architectures will change. And if you
Mhm.
don't understand how jobs are like, they're like Lego blocks, right? Jobs are a bunch of Legos built into a certain shape. Those Legos are tasks. It's the work. And if you need to, like, if you take like 5 of those Legos or all the red ones away, you now have to rebuild a new job with this different set of Legos. This needs to be just how we start thinking about the foundation of work. And then you have to think about, okay, well, now which people are going to go and fit into this new Lego house that I built with only like blue and green bricks. So the people leaders need to start to get very, very comfortable with the concept of just having to change constantly and figuring out how to deal with that emotionally and structurally. And they need to understand work. And more important, they need to understand tasks. And this is not
Yeah.
like they have to go learn all the business. They do not. There are data feeds that are task intelligence feeds. They need to start understanding those and thinking differently about the architecture of jobs as Legos instead of like this dollhouse that somebody built out of wood 55 years ago. It's no longer how we can function. And that's how EPAM functions. And I mean, this is again, my whole worldview is like how EPAM has done things. And maybe there are other ways to do it, but I actually just don't think so.
Mm.
Not like that old model is just old. And we need to give it a hug and a kiss and put it aside and
Yeah.
build up something new.
The job architecture point's really interesting because, you know, in this world, it's irrelevant what has already been built. The only reason it's relevant is because of RAM salary frameworking. You know, like other than that, like when I'm asked that question in customer meetings, I'm like, it's helpful for RAM and paying people and stuff like that. But like for this new world, you need something more dynamic, more something that'll move exactly the way you've described it. Like the job that is actually being done today, 46% of that over the next 6 months will be changing dramatically. And actually that rule turns into a new rule because we're also bringing in this other stuff that sits on top. And also the productivity of that will go like up because we're now doing more revenue facing work and all of the mundane admin stuff is now over here with Bob, our agent. And I think this is where it starts to become, and in that world, how do you keep a job architecture up to date? Like even in the old world, job architectures were not even, as soon as the project was complete, it was already out of date. And I think that's where I think that the work ontology is this kind of like framework of work that is allowing an organization to have this work intelligence that'll drive in and out, which is where you're able to link it back up to any of your skills work. Because the problem that I'm going to anticipate is, let's imagine a world that you and I are right. And I think we are. I think we are because I've proven it in real life. You've done it in your customer, but I'm now proving it in scale in multiple different customers where they're all very different industries. And we've tested now and we've seen actually we can see a high level validation of the actual task and work accuracy because the governance has been done. We can see that. But what I'm predicting is the more vendors and the more come in, great, because that creates more of a market. But then we're going to have this other problem about like skills harmony. All the different vendors have different languages. I think this is where you need to have that one common language of work that will connect into your learning system, your TA system, into your HRIS system. And that kind of becomes that one source of truth, which is skills, task, subtask, action, the outcome of the work. Like that's the whole overarching model. Do you see that being an issue? Because I think that skills languaging was such a problem with every vendor having their own ontology. Do you think that'll be another like issue when it comes to this task world?
Yes. Because if you have, again, like if you have just different vendors who are defining tasks differently and structuring them, you have a data problem. It's a data problem. Your data needs to be consistently defined and cataloged and governed. And so whether your data is tasks or skills or contexts or whatever, there's like millions of data sources. At EPAM, at least, we have a single source of truth for what our work ontology is. We call it something different, but whatever. We also have one source of truth for what the skills are, and there's a way that we map those. And I mean, again, maybe I'm underestimating how easily it would be to do this, but it doesn't make sense that you define the same data differently, like in any
Hmm.
place. And so having multiple ontologies of anything is just going to make it harder for you to synthesize data cleanly, update that data,
Yeah.
maintain that data, and then get insights from that data, and then drive actions from one
Hmm.
system into another. Like, at least, again, I'm not a data expert, but that's how we're designed, and it makes sense to me
Yeah.
intuitively.
Yeah. What we have seen in this kind of scenario is there's kind of two different types of customer. There's a customer that's already started on skills based and has got different skill languages. And what we're doing is we're kind of harmonizing that and bringing it together in the work ontology. So we're not saying this is not good, the skill stuff. What we're saying is let's just make sure that everything is aligned. And to your point, the foundation is good, but ring fence it into the ontology that we have built so that you've got one common language. Or on the other side, we have customers who have tried to do some kind of bits and pieces to describe skills, but don't have anything really.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we're saying, this is great, start from scratch, like actually build the ontology, which includes, your industry, your work, your job,
Yeah.
your rolling level, your role groups, your all of the tasks, the subtasks, the skill requirement, the triangulation. That's what they get. The first example is a little bit more tricky just because, you've got multiple different, like the learning team have this language, you've got talent development have this language. So there is a bit of a, hey, Reejig doesn't actually care too much about the end, like what we call the bloody skill, like literally. Like we can call it whatever you want. Let's just make sure that it's the same, that you're using the same term.
Correct.
Like
Yes.
I have no preciousness around it has to be the term I don't give a shit. Like honestly, just call it the same thing. It from how you hire to how you retire. That's literally all I'm saying. Is
Yeah.
like, and vendors should be working together because it's going to become more of an ecosystem now rather than like one machine wins all. It will be an ecosystem, and our job as vendors should be to come together to do what's best for the customer, right? So it should
Yeah.
be, that's my view anyway, but it might be slightly naive.
No, I mean, it's a market. Like, customers want it, they need it, and they will start getting together and demanding it. And that's great because the market needs that. There's not a single ontology that will rule them all for anything, but to have 58 different ones at different levels of granular, like it's just ridiculous. And what I'm hearing you say for your option one, what I'm hearing you say is what we're doing at EPAM, right? You've taken all the different sources, but you're turning them into one. You have one skills ontology. Terminology doesn't really matter, as you
Yep.
said, but you have harmonized them into a single thing that you are then connecting to your task ontology, your work ontology. And so you can do that matching. Like you have to do that. There's no other way, I think, to do that cleanly than either you build it and you build just one, or you take all your stuff and you rationalize it, and then you have to do a lot of like work on the business needs to do more work on top of that to add specific things for their organization, like your own processes, your own intellectual property, like stuff that's specific to every business, and then to figure out if they to assign weights and like importance to certain types of skills and tasks versus other ones because your business is different than your competitors. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like you just have to get to one so that you can
Yep.
work with the one.
Yep. And I think the governance part, because, we've done a lot of work with extracting data across so many different systems, and that is very noisy. And we ended up deciding, you know what, that's not the best approach, because how do you kind of create a scoring mechanism for the validation of that data if if it's across all of your different CRMs, your ATS, your HRIS, then you're pulling out of like, the JIRAs, all the different systems. It's very noisy. Very noisy. So what we did was we stopped and actually said, we're going to do a part first, which is a lot of effort. We're going to create these ontologies, break them down, and then harmonize off what we see in the systems rather than the other side, because that other side is a lot more harder to define. And we find that there was issues when it came back to customers about back to that skills validation thing. Like if they don't trust this data, no one is going to use it. And tasks are even more complicated than skills, I believe.
Agreed. And here's the other thing, and this is where I think people aren't quite seeing the big, longer term picture. So all the efforts right now are extraction. You're getting insights from all the different systems. But in an optimal world, those systems are autonomously working together. Like
Mm-hmm.
I always give this example, like we hire somebody at EPAM, they're missing 3 skills. Like the ATS system knows that. Unless you have the same definition across the systems, inside all the systems, you can't do what we do today, which is, agents or whoever, something tells the learning, LMS, you need to pull these learning programs that then get sent into the onboarding program so that they can populate those learnings into that person's journey. At the same time, you're blocking staffing because they can't be assigned to projects where they're missing skills. And your talent management system has to be prompting the hiring manager to check in on that. Like, unless you have, we call it an event-driven foundation, unless you have the definitions inside the systems being the same, you can't do that autonomous connection of data to make stuff happen, as opposed to just getting insights. And I think this is where, this, again, EPAM's model might not be universal. This is not my area of expertise, but to get the most value out of your agents and your AI, you have to clean up the data in the systems underneath. It's not enough to extract. You have to be able to move.
Yep. No, I think you're completely right. From what we've seen, from like building it in, scaling it into multiple different types of workforces, to building it in our own company, it's a lot easier for us to play in our back garden versus like in an enterprise where we've got a lot of restrictions, right? I think what you're saying is accurate. And I think all of what I came to the point of like 2.5 years ago was like data is the problem. Like, actually, like the biggest problem I have is I'm not going to be successful in solving this problem unless I find the data to fill in the gaps. Hence why we invested so much money, into building out the work ontology. And like, we're so grateful that we have done that because it's an instant result. And we looked at more recent stats on validation. So customers will take the data. Some do who are high risk. Think of banks, they are really high risk and they want to go and check the task data with the business to say, hey, does this feel like you? And then some are kind of spot checking on certain roles. What we have found is now our percentage rate was sitting at 82. We're now sitting up at 97% accuracy of the task, which is like, shows you that the quality of the foundation is the gap filler, but there's that harmonization that still needs to happen to localize it exactly what you said to the customer. You may call it something different than what I would call it. So let's just make sure we're all synced on the language, and then that gets rolled out. It's such an exciting, and I love your approach because you're so forthright in just saying it. No, it's good. Like, it's a good thing because like, I think sometimes you need to hear like a really strong kind of perspective on it so that it stops you in your tracks to have a think about, hold on a second, have I got this right? Like, I mean, I had an example a couple of years ago where I was just in the flow. And then I was like, whoa, like I had to like completely stop myself from I had to shut off all the noise and just go, I need to think about solving the problem, not what everyone's saying. And that's the part I think as the buyer tries to navigate this world, your voice is helpful because it helps cut through that noise and enables, the folks who are at the end of, paying a lot of money and putting a lot of reputation on the line to kind of preemptively imagine what could go wrong here, a bit of bottom drawer planning around, okay, what are the things that we shouldn't do? And a final question, do you think that HR will drive the AI strategy? Or where do you think this responsibility will lie? Because it depends on who you talk to. What's your take?
I don't think that HR is capable of driving the whole business's AI strategy, because the AI strategy it's about process and it's about product and it's about serve. It's not just about people. It's definitely about people, but it's a bigger picture. And so I posted about this a few days ago. Like I've been debating. So right now, C-suite breaks up people, process, and technology into 3 different, like you have your CHRO, you have your COO, and your CIO, CTO. They are incentivized and structured right now to work in pair, not work together, to work like, parallel play like little kids do when they're babies. Like they don't interact all that well together. This whole AI world requires them to work as one, because otherwise you cannot have people running off differently than your digital workers, than your process. It won't work. And so there's two ways that I think about this. It's possible to go. One is that the CEO has to put on his or her big boy pants and tell people to work differently and incentivize them and build processes where they are forced to work together to solve a common challenge. Or you, and I've seen this just recently at another company, you appoint a new executive. This company called it the Chief Administrative Officer. And you know who reports into that one person? CHRO, COO, and the CIO, CTO.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a forcing function to get them to work together with one person, like, the single like throat to choke or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And so I see one of those two things happening, but what I can be 100% confident about is the status quo will not be sufficient for this new world. Like, we are about to see, as you said, we've all been saying, the biggest revolution in business in the shortest time frame in the history of like the world. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
about to happen. And I think the C-suite structure and how we have defined HR is for a world that is about to not exist anymore. And we have to rethink everything to optimize how we're going to function in this new world.
And what would you say to like really good HR folks who want to be valuable, who are really passionate and motivated to do good and want to be part of this? Like, how can they help? Like, what do they need to do to lean in right now to be part of this? What would you say?
Learn your business, learn your AI strategy, learn what threats are coming to your organization. Sit down and ask the right questions of your COO, your CTO, CIO, whoever's reading your AI strategy. You have to become their best friend, and you need to bring value to them. Don't expect them to assume that you can do this. And this is like, with all love in my heart, right? You have to make them want to listen. And that means framing what you want, the skills thing, better experiences for employees, human potential, all that stuff. What we want is right. But we have to frame it as a mechanism for them to get what they need done. And what they need to do is rethink work, build technology, change processes, and become more operationally efficient. Frame what you want in their language, and they will listen.
This is awesome. Sandra, we could talk for days, but I think we're out of time. A massive thank you to Sandra for giving us her insights, her vision on how she believes it should work. I think if you're not following Sandra on social media, I think your main platform is what, LinkedIn, Sandra, for people to get you. Follow her on LinkedIn. She puts out some pretty decent spicy posts, which are great to kind of make you think a little bit differently, which is exactly what we all need to do in this once in a generation change. So a massive thank you. If folks are wanting to book in a masterclass or to, follow on a conversation with Sandra and I, feel free to DM us. And Sandra, thank you. And let's look forward to an awesome year together.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Love what you're doing and excited to share with, the story with you and everybody else.
And thanks, team, for dialing in. See you all soon.